Okay, I'm going to take a look at this Nikon F3 and why I feel it's Nikon's best camera ever. I really wish they would make a digital back for it. I just love the simplicity of the camera, the durability, and it has everything I need. I don't need any of the extra stuff, and it's just a beautiful camera. I have owned, I had a Nikon F2A with the motor drive, action finder, and a 250 exposure back. I ended up selling that many years ago. I currently also have the two Nikon F4s, a Nikon F5. Those are all film cameras along with this F3. And I have a digital D70S. One of these days I want to get something like the D800 or something like that. But in any event, just looking back on this film camera, and I'll show you why I love it so much. So what you see here is a Nikon F3. I originally bought the F3 body. It was the F3 HP version. I bought that in February 19 of 1986 from LaBelle in Inwood, New Jersey. And at that time I paid $429.95 for the body only. And so then I added the action finder, which you see up here. That's the DA2. I bought that April 15th of 1986 from B&H, and I paid $157.95 for that. I also have the motor drive, the MD4 that you see here. Bought that from B&H on May 8th of 1986. Paid $209.95 for that. Then I've got this little firing MR3 adapter to use as a firing thing when you're holding it vertically. And you can also put the old-fashioned cable release in there. The MR3, bought that from B&H also on May 8th of 1986 for $19.90. And then below that, and I'll take this apart later and show you all the items. Below that is the MK1 firing rate converter. Bought that from B&H August 6th of 1986 for $79.95. Alright, so let's take a look at this. I've taken everything apart. This is what I originally bought. This is the Nikon F3 HP, a high point finder. And that's what it looks like as it comes without any accessories. Now I'm a very picky person, and I always treated my equipment as fine optics as you should. I've got telescope equipment and stuff, and so I was very picky. Now one thing that I always made up for my cameras on the straps, and by the way, this is a camera strap, the Nikon ANY4B. I liked it just because it's nice and thin. Kind of out of the way, it's not thick, and so I always use those for my cameras. But I always made a gasket, this little thing here, out of the rubber they use on roofing material, and just cut that out so you wouldn't get much brassing. As you can see, there's just a hair of brassing there, just a hair, even with that on both sides. But in this camera, I have used this camera a lot. But again, I take care of it. And you can see it's just I would call it just, I don't know, excellent, pristine shape. But in any event, so let's take a look at it. As in the old days of film, this is where you would put the end of your film container in there so you knew what you were shooting. And this is the rear of the high point finder. And it had a shutter in there, as you can see, so that way If you were taking long exposures, light wouldn't get into the camera. So let's look at the top side of the camera. Over here on the left side, you have your take-up. You put your film in here. You'd advance it with the rewind crank here. And it was unique with the F3. They had the shoe went up over the crank here. You can see the SB16, I believe, I have several of those, but that would fit up over here. You can see the contacts that would go with your flash. And then you see the exposure compensation dial there. Push this down, and then you turn this to lock it in for your metering if you wanted to plus or minus your exposure. And then over here was your, just the simplicity. This is what I love about the F3. Your shutter dial. Basic. I love it. Easy to find. Don't have to go through scrolling. You can look at it right there, move it real quick. I just love that feature. And then you had to advance your film. That's what you would use there. And I don't have any batteries in here. It takes those little batteries, but because I didn't use it in this way, and when I put the motor drive on, I'll show you how that works. But it did have something interesting. It had a mechanical 1/90th of a second, as I recall. In case the batteries went out, you still had 1/90th of a second. So you take this knob, turn it like that, and when you needed to take a picture, like that. Just love the sound of this camera. It's just so solid. And then this button you would use for your to check your aperture preview by pushing that. So going back up on top here, as you advance the film, you've got the counter there. So anytime you would open up the back, the counter went to 0. Another little thing that it had, which I've used, let me set the shutter off. Another thing that I've used is this little thing here. What that did is it allowed you to take, it would keep the film from moving, and you could take multiple exposures. But every time you wanted to take, if you were doing more than 2, you had to pull that back, and you could take the picture, and it wouldn't advance. See there? But now if I don't do that, you see where it advances. And I've used that in the past. I like that. In-camera double exposures. Most of it was for pictures with the moon is when I normally did that. Something else looking here on top, what I really liked is the old-fashioned threaded cable release. You know, you can have your electronic ones, but if something breaks in that, you can always go back to the old-fashioned cable. I really like that. So this little lever right here was your on and off. So that way, in this, if you had batteries in there, this would fire the shutter. This would turn it off. Okay, now this little lever right here was for the self-timer. When you uncovered that dot, it's got a thing back here and here. A little hard to get into, but that's for the self-timer. And it would be a 10-second self-timer. Once you hit the shutter, it would delay it by 10 seconds. And then this would blink red right here while it was in the self-time mode until it took the picture. And then back here you see the film plane. designation. That's where the film plane is. Going up to the shutter speed dial, you have the 1/60th of a second in red, and that was to indicate that that was the highest manual shutter speed that you could use for proper synchronization with electronic flash. A, of course, was for automatic, and that locked, so to get it out of automatic you had to push the center button down to rotate it into other settings. So now we're going to look at the bulb feature. So when it was set at bulb for time exposures, the shutter would stay open for as long as the shutter release button was depressed. So if you had pushed it manually like that, or you had a shutter release cable, as long as you held it down, the shutter remained open. So now here you see the T setting. Now that was a mechanical setting. That was for a time exposure. So when you activated it, you could push it down, let off, it would stay on. Okay, so if you wanted to take 5-minute exposures, whatever the length of time was, it was a mechanical setting, no battery drain. And to have the shutter, you know, to end your exposure, you would just turn it to another setting, and that would then allow it to be the end of your exposure. Really nice feature. So here you see the X setting, and it too is also a locked feature like the A, at automatic. You push down the center button to rotate it out of that X. And that was to provide a shutter speed that was a setting of 1/80th of a second, and it provided the proper synchronization with electronic flash units that were other than Nikon dedicated flash units. And over on the left side where the film advance lever and stuff is, to take up spool, to take up wind crank, is your ISO settings for your film speed for your meter. So while we're looking at the top part of the camera, on both sides here you have this release lever for the viewfinder. Comes off just like that. And as you can see, I always use the screen. I think it's the well, I don't remember if it's the E screen. I don't see it labeled on it. I'm not going to pull it out. But I always had the ones that use the grid line, horizontal and vertical. I always liked that type of a screen. And again, this is the original high point finder that came with the camera when I bought it. And here you see when I pull back, you see the lever that connects up to the top to hold this down. Very simple. And that's another thing. I love removable finders. I just love that. So you can make it adaptable. I've got a waist level finder and then that action finder that you saw. Really a nice feature. They just don't do that anymore with the digitals. So while I've got the high point finder off, I thought I'd show you the waist level finder. Pretty simple. The DW3. So that's what it looks like on the camera. And I bought this from B&H. It was April 24th, 1990. Paid $65.95. So, now why did I buy a waist level finder? Because they're not something I used hardly at all. The main reason I bought the waist level finder was when I went to total solar eclipses. If you've got the sun up at a high angle or any angle, as you can imagine, trying to look straight down in here. Now, so my main concern was just keeping it centered as I took pictures. So, you know, when I went to one eclipse where the sun was 89 degrees up, so, you know, 1 degree off the zenith. So it's nice looking straight through. So to operate it, all you do is pull up on like that, and you just look right on the focusing screen. Now it did have there's a little, this little centerpiece here. If you take and push that, it brings up a magnifying glass, so you could magnify to do focusing. And basically what I always did is I just pushed that in. If I didn't want it, is I would just push it in, and you can hear it click, and it stays right there. Then to close it, just go like that, open it up, and it always defaulted to this. If you wanted the magnifying glass, you had to push that little button in, that little notched area, and it worked great. Like I said, that was the only reason I ever bought the waist level finder. Never ever used it for anything other than total eclipses. Okay, so I've put the action finder on there, the DA2, for the rest of this, because that's what I always used anyways. So let's finish the camera body. Now, I was in error earlier, okay, my mistake. This button right here, okay, that was for exposure, the exposure memory lock button. So when you're in automatic and you want to move in close or take a reading other than what the whole thing might be, that might fool the meter, under or overexposed, you'd go to what you'd want to expose, push the button in and hold it, okay, that would hold the meter reading in memory, and it would lock it, and then you'd go ahead and shoot the picture. Once you went back to where you wanted to be, shoot the picture and then let it off. But it was kind of strange because you had to hold that in and make sure you didn't your hand didn't move off of that. I never used it because I always use manual meters anyways, and never relied on anything like that. I never used the A in this, so that was never an issue. But that's what that was for. Again, I was in error earlier. So this has mirror lockup, a nice feature. So to do that, you use this control lever. You push this in. So you push this in, pull down, and there you can see the mirror's locked up. So if you were doing anything that you wanted to make sure there wouldn't be any issue with mirror slap, then to let it down, just push that. Now, this lever does two things. It allows you to, again, activate the mirror lockup, and when you don't want to activate the mirror lockup, look at this little lever in here. You can see that. Now watch, when I push this in, that is your depth of field preview right there. That would activate on the back of the lens and give you your depth of field preview. Now, of course, this knob over here is for your lens mounting. So you'd want to mount the lens, push that down, turn the lens on, let it up. That would lock your lens with that pin. Okay, now this little lever you see here, this little notch, that's for the meter coupling lever. And when you put your lens on there, it would move this over and know where, it would tell the camera what aperture. Now, if you had non-AI lenses, aperture indexing lenses, which I never had any, so I never used it, I'm just showing you the feature. You'd push this little button right here in, and you'd flip that back. A little hard to do here. Flip that back. That way the lens could go on here, and you would turn it manually, and it wouldn't rotate that. And then to put it back, just flip it back. And of course, this is the cover for your sync, flash sync cable. So now looking at the bottom of the camera, this cover is where the batteries would go. You would use two 1.55 volt silver oxide batteries, or you could use one 3 volt lithium battery. When I used it that way, I used two SR44 batteries. This is again your for your tripod socket, and that also you would use when you attach the motor drive. That would attach to that. So there's a 1/4-20. These were contacts for the motor drive, and that came with the cover, but when you use the motor drive, it took the cover off, and here you see the pins that would then mate to that. This was also for, I believe, rewinding the film on the when you put the motor drive on, and there you see the coupling for that. That would mate to that. And then when you wanted to release the film, this little button right here, you'd push that in. That would release the tension and you could rewind your film. And interestingly enough, if you take a look at that little pin right there that I have in the center, that, and I'll show you later on the motor drive, would push that up. So you on the motor, and I'll show you that when you push that, these two things on the motor drive, it would manually activate this to release that, so you could advance your film to rewind it. And this is just for an indexing point. That you see right there for the motor drive. So let's take a look at the motor drive for the F3. This is the MD4. So we looking right here, as I said, these were the contacts for the motor drive to the camera. Here you see the wheel that you would use, very nice, to screw it to the bottom, the 1/4-20 tripod socket. This is actually the winding mechanism for the motor, and you can hear this. And I turn that by hand. This is just a registration pin to keep it, I'm assuming, to keep it from moving. Now here's that little pin that I told you on the back of the camera, that when you were using just the F3 body, that you would push up on the bottom of it to release the film so you could wind it back in. Now this is interesting. Look at this. This had a two-part release mechanism to rewind it. Once you got done with your film, okay, obviously you can't reach down at the back of the camera. You can't reach down here and push that button in. So what you did is you had this, you had one numbered 1, and this was 2. So when you pushed, you'd push this little button in, see, because that wouldn't move. You had to push this little button in, push that button and pull forward. So when you did that, look at that, isn't that cool? That would push that pin up, that would release the film, that would allow it to be taken back, and then where you held that, you'd push that up, and then this would wind the actual sprocket of the film. So I'll show you that. So we'll open up the back of the camera, and you'll see where that went through this hole right here. So your film would be in there, and it would just, that would just go up and just into the sprocket built into the film cassette, and rewind your film. I think quite a unique, really nice. I just love that about that. It's just a nice manual, a good design. It's just very nice. And then when you got done, just pulled them back, retracted, open up the back, pull your spool out of film. So when using the motor drive, your frame counting dial was this now, and this was your reset dial. So this little button you push in, and it'd get the lights. That would be your battery indicator, and I'll put batteries in here later. So those two terminals you see in the center of the field are auto rewind stop terminals. And I didn't have the back, but if you had the MF6 camera back, that would, once the film leader was out, it would stop it so that it would stay out of the cassette, the film cassette. But I didn't have that back, so I've never used it. So looking at the front of the motor drive, this terminal was for the magazine back, the 250 exposure back. It had a cord that would come around there and attach to, but I use this for the firing rate converter, so that's why there's no cap on there. And of course, here's the front side of the attachment to the bottom of the camera. And then this is the shutter release, the MR3 attachment, and it allows for vertical shooting, and it also has the old-fashioned cable release. Now the cap that you see above the release, that is for the external power, and I've never used it. I'm not really sure what that was for. Of course, at the bottom you see the 1/4-20 tripod attachment point. So here on the grip side you see the release for the cartridge that holds your batteries. Now this took 8 AA batteries, and I'll go ahead and put some in. Okay, so there you see the 8 batteries. And we'll go ahead and now we push this button in, and that's the battery test. You see the 2 lights come on. Now with those batteries in here, it gives it a nice, I always love the F3 with this motor drive on it, because I like a nice heavy camera. Had a lot of, it was just felt good. When the camera's on top of it, it was just very, very well balanced. That's why this is my favorite Nikon. So now, as we're going to put this camera back together in its pieces, let's look at the firing rate converter, the MK1. So this now would screw into the magazine terminal for the 250 exposure back. And if you did have the 250 exposure back, you would now attach it here. And then this is what would screw into the bottom of the motor drive to attach it. This becomes your tripod socket. And then this, push in the center, you pull out, and you can have it continuous 1, 2, 3, off, or to continuous, or single. And I'll show you that. So all you got to do, put that on. I kind of started this. Kind of start that. Get that started. So that's on. Let me grab a quarter here. So that's done. And there you have it. So now we'll take the motor drive firing rate converter combination and attach it just like that. there you have it. Okay, so now we've got the batteries in there. Everything's attached. Let's see how this thing works. So, right now, it's in the red, the locked position. So, nothing will activate it. You can't push on any button. The shutter will not fire. But, if I take this and pick it up and turn it to single, now I'm able to fire. Oh, I love that sound. In single. I can do it there. And I can do it there. I held in. Okay. Now, unless I activate the firing rate converter, it will not work. So we're not going to use that right at the moment. Now I can push up on the button on the dial, turn it to continuous, and that's the continuous. Now I'll go over here, turn it to lock. Now I come down here, and this is in the off position, so let me turn it to continuous single, and it doesn't work. You have to have this set to on to single. Now, let me hit the MK1 firing rate converter. This is set to continuous single. So, I can, now it's off, but this is still going to work because the top is activated. So now let me go to continuous. Let me go all the way over here to continuous 1 frames a second. Let me go to 2 frames a second. Let me go to 3. And then we're back to off. Now, I can set that like that to continuous 3, and I can come over here and use the this other release, and it will work in the same fashion. So I can either use, I've got it set to continuous 2 frames a second, so I can either use the firing rate converter button, or very nice. Now, I haven't used this camera in quite some time, nor any of my film cameras, the F3, the 2 F4s, or the F5, just because, you know, I've been using digital, and like I said, I've got a Nikon D70S, which has performed very well for me, but at some point I want to get a better digital, although I've been very happy with the D70, but I really wish Nikon would come out with something like this F3. I do manual metering. I don't need all the crap. I don't need all the extra bells and whistles. This Nikon F3 is, in my opinion, just what a camera should be. You know, if you're out building your house and your hammer breaks from pounding those 16-penny nails, get the F3 out of your pickup truck, and you could use that as a backup hammer. I'm telling you, it's built that well. Just love the camera. And I would love, as I said earlier, I'd love to be able to put a digital back on this F3. Something simple. I do all manual metering anyways. I don't need anything fancier than what we have right here. I love the layout. I like the action finder. You can't put finders on like you can here. I just love this action finder. I have glasses. It works great. I like the idea of being able to put a waist level finder on there. The shutter speed dial is perfect, just like that. Everything is easily accessible. Don't have to go through a lot of menus. So, anyways, and turns out these cameras aren't worth hardly anything. I called a place a while back, and with everything that you see here, they told me maybe $100 they would give me. You got to be kidding me. Obviously, nobody uses these much anymore, so it's just not even worth getting rid of. But, you know, just like I said, I just wish Nikon would come out with something like this. Love the F3.